I'm always happy to meet another person from the region.
Yeah. Right. The Mid Atlantic is
Yeah,
doesn't get as much love as the coastline, the other parts of the coastline. There, everyone's like, "Oh, I'm from
truly.
the Northeast," or "I'm from SoCal," or yeah, it's
Exactly.
fantastic. But all right, thanks for taking the time here.
Well, thanks for having me. This is your show, so I'm the one who's grateful to be on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. Yeah, especially you reaching out to me on your own. I have a few questions because we have like this is like a writer centric podcast. We ask like specific kind of marketing, kind of self publishing. All of that is like very interested to our listeners and all that, especially the way the market goes now. So whenever somebody reaches out on their own, and it's not like through a publicist or something. I'm always just like, oh yeah, because that's
Because we're doing the yeoman's work. We're doing
exactly
the
exactly
writing
yeah.
and the marketing and the booking. So yeah, 100%.
Exactly, yeah, and I've been burned by a few publicists as well, so I've grown leery of some of them with with the
Yeah, they like to take your money and
yeah
say, yeah, the results are coming.
yeah. I was telling people that I was like, yeah, you know what you're paying them for is you're paying them to email me and then ask if you want to come on, like
Yeah.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
this is Andrew Whitstadt, and you were listening to Heavy Board, and we're recording this on November 23rd, 2024. My guest today is Michael Fedor. Michael is a former teacher, a former political campaign manager and strategist, and a former politician himself, running for office over 5 times. And on top of that, listeners, Michael is also a writer. His first book, a short novella called The Senate Deception, came out in January of 2024, and his debut novel, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, came out just this past summer, followed quickly by the sequel, Tree of Liberty, which came out November of 2024. Michael writes thriller novels with political themes that aren't afraid to experiment with some science fiction and other genres, and sometimes involve aspects of his direct experience in politics, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he has been through the trials of running for political office himself, something I know most people would be terrified of. But Michael made a long career out of it. It is here today to talk about his books, his life, and the crazy world of politics. Michael, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Board.
Andrew, thanks for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here.
We like to start this off with the kind of the same question we ask all writers, which is like, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did all these things start to meld a young Michael?
Great question, Andrew. And again, thanks for having me. So, for your listeners, I bet my background is a lot like many of the listeners. I grew up in a working class, middle class family. For the first 12 years of my life, things were pretty comfortable. My dad worked. My mom was home with us. My brother and I, we took family vacations on the 4th of July. We went places around the United States. Things were pretty normal. I was pretty much an introverted kid. I followed the rules instinctively and to the letter. And then my parents split up when I was 12, and life changed dramatically. Things became much more hard financially for my mom to support us. What became very clearly a working class family, struggled to make ends meet. I had to take on more responsibility in the house. So by the time I was 16, I was going to high school, 7 to 3, and then I would leave high school and I'd go to work from 4 to 9, and then every day repeat that. And I worked 20, 30, sometimes 40 hours a week with multiple jobs. And that was to support, myself. So I wasn't a burden on my mom and eventually my stepfather. And, things were a lot rougher. So by the time I was 18, I was looking to just run away from those problems, escape. And I went away to Ithaca College in New York and thought I would figure out what I wanted to do with my life just as long as I was as far away from home as I could afford to go.
Yeah, for sure. What did your father do?
My dad was a truck driver. He was a long hauler for most of my life. He hauled every manner of things, and it was a union job until I think about 1985. Then the industry was deregulated, and things got a lot worse, and it became harder for him financially. He was an independent owner and operator, and so then by the time I was 10, my mom went to work at a bank
Okay.
part time to help support the family because things started to get rocky, and I think that's when their marriage started getting rocky too.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was in Pennsylvania you grew up mostly, or?
Yeah, just outside of Pittsburgh, in a city called Newcastle.
Okay.
I love to tell people that until I was about 13, I thought every town in America had shuttered steel plants and empty warehouses that surrounded it and filled it. It wasn't until I left the Rust Belt as a teenager that I start to discover that, most of America doesn't have these shuttered factories and towns. And my town of Newcastle was a very depressed former steel city, former manufacturing city on the Ohio line.
Yeah, it's incredible too I mean, again, growing up in Baltimore, this Bethlehem Steel was closed by the time, I was like born and raised in that kind of area. And then everybody would talk about it. Like the older people, they would be like, oh, once the railroad shut down, because that happened before the steel plant shut, the B&O shut down. And then, and then the steel plant shut down. And now we only have a few, like I think it's like Domino Sugar and, McCormick Spices or something. And like the only things left in the city. I guess Under Armour came in and did a little bit of revival, but not nothing like Bethlehem Steel was, like that. It
The good old days.
It destroys the entire, like there were entire areas that were great middle class areas. Anybody could get a good kind of, unionized job, and it just got destroyed when Bethlehem's like now those places are so economically depressed. Like it's incredible the difference.
Yeah, Newcastle had a tin plant, it had a pottery, and it had a steel plant in the turn of the century, 19th into the 20th century. And that's what attracted my families from Italy and Hungary to come to the United States. And they moved directly to Newcastle, Pennsylvania to work in the pottery and the tin mill and the steel plant. And, there was the Italian side of town, there was the Hungarian side of town, the German side of town. And you go to Newcastle, Pennsylvania today, and there is maybe 15,000 people living there. It used to be 60,000 or 80,000, right? So it is severely depressed. There is nothing to do there. There are, the only jobs you can get are working at the grocery stores and the local businesses. There is no driving economic identity for that city anymore. And I think that's a story of many parts of America that people relate to is this, our regions used to be driven by the employers, and now those employers have evaporated, and it leaves a lot of people wondering, what are they going to do for a living, and why do they stay in those places, and can they afford to stay in those places?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. And you say you've experienced all of that, right?
Yeah.
And kind of, and that was like the peak. I guess that was like everybody talks about that was like the peak of divorce. When was this? What were the rough timeline? We don't have to give exact.
Yeah,
timeline.
1990 and 1992. And so what corresponds is the end of the Reagan era and the short Bush era. But my first taste of politics is meeting a governor from Arkansas at the Lawrence County Fair when I was about 13. I was with my dad. He hated politics. And I insisted that I break away and go see this political rally that was happening at the Lawrence County Fair, made my way up to the front of the line, and there's this governor going down, shaking hands, shook hand with, was Governor Bill Clinton at the time.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was it Clinton?
Yes, and I became addicted to politics from that point on because he went on to win the nomination and win the presidency, and he was young, I think 46 or 43 at the time he was elected. And so I just identified with the optimism and the hope that the Clinton-Gore ticket brought. And for me, that was the elixir, that was the thing that turned my world into something. It used to be I was going to be an animator, right? Thank God I didn't do that because that industry's basically gone, replaced by computers. But for years, I just drew cartoons. That was my thing. But when I met Bill Clinton, I suddenly got addicted to news. I got addicted to writing. I got addicted to speech, delivering speech into public policy. And so by the time he's inaugurated in 93. Now my parents are completely split. We've moved across the line to Youngstown, Ohio, and I stayed home from school that day to watch his inauguration. So that's the beginning for me of why I'm a political thriller writer today. It begins by meeting this governor from Arkansas at the Lawrence County Fair in Newcastle.
That's great. Yeah. The other question we like to ask writers, like when we're getting kind of the young life, when did reading and writing come into your life? You said cartooning was a big thing. Did you like comic books and cartoons? Like when did reading and writing kind of come in?
I love to read those choose your own adventure novels.
Oh yeah.
Right? Remember, like I was reading Transformers, right? If you want Optimus Prime to like fight Megatron, turn to page 82. If he thinks you run and hide, go to page 96. I loved those. That's what I was really reading a lot of. And I remember also in fourth grade that Mrs. Morrison used to read to us in class. Super Fudge was like this book that she read all the time. And I just remember loving that experience because my parents did not read a lot to us. Dad worked a lot. And then by the time I was 10, my mom was working a lot too. She encouraged, and my dad encouraged reading and writing. And I knew I had a creative spark in me because, like you said, I was drawing all the time. My dad said I was drawing Garfield, right? That's
Right,
the thing
yeah.
I love to draw. And I drew dinosaurs. And my dad said, you can't just draw Jim Davis's cartoons. You need to have your own cartoon strip. So I invented the Stoneville Gang, which was these dinosaurs that looked a lot like maybe they'd been drawn by Jim Davis. But they were the Stoneville Gang. Zeke and Tom was this brontosaurus and this triceratops, and they had got in all these adventures. And I was starting to write comic strips of them and their storyline, and like they had characters. And for me, that was the beginning of it. But the first time I remember my writing having impact was in fifth grade. Christmas fifth grade. So this is now my parents are split up, and I had a writing assignment, and I wrote this story about this Christmas ornament that magically appears on this Christmas tree. It's a short story, and because the kid's father had died, right? So it doesn't take a very deep psychological swim in the wells of my own, youth to understand why did the kid's father die in the story, but it was like this ornament that signified that his dad was like listening and was still in his life, and he could like somehow was watching him still, and he was reassured by that. And I remember my English teacher then passing that essay, that short story, around to all the other teachers in fifth grade to read, partially I think because they were worried about me, and partially because they were all impressed at this fifth grader wrote this really deep story. I still have it, by the way.
Yeah.
I found it amongst my old documents that I have in the basement. So that's where I think writing for me then had power, because I was expressing something that I was feeling. I also entertained people by it, and I got attention from it. And so, as we moved and as I continued to figure out who I was as an adolescent, for me, writing became a very important part of that and a powerful portion of that. And so then fast forward to senior in high school, trying to find a way out of the life I was in, try to get as far away as I could, entered an essay contest with the County Bar Association about the First Amendment, whether or not hate speech should be protected speech under the First Amendment, and won the essay contest, won $2,000, which helped me buy my first computer ever. And was very exciting. And took it away with me to college, and was able to write many term papers and many essays at Ithaca College and eventually Penn State with that computer. So.
Yeah, I said getting your essay passed around in fifth grade. It's like the first taste of politics, right? You're getting everything passed around, all these people judging it. Yeah,
totally
what
right.
were some of the first writers that you got enamored with, or who are your kind of like idols in the literary side of things? Who are the writers that always get you going or like inspire you?
Yeah, so the first book I remember reading on my own was Redwall, and I don't remember the author, but this was a story of a mouse that like lived in a castle, right? And he was like trying to become a knight, right? And I bet if we Google the author, we can find out who the author was. But that was the beginning for me, like finally being addicted to something I could read on my own and be excited to like seek out the type of reading I wanted to do. And I read a lot of fantasy early on. Absent of who the authors were, I just wanted the stories. I wanted the stories of the knights. I wanted the story of adventure. It wasn't until I got into high school that I became a little bit more aware of authors. And one of the first authors I remember reading was Michael Crichton. I read
yes.
Jurassic Park start to finish. Loved it. Read Lost World. Went back and read the Andromeda Strain. So like Michael Crichton for me was my first taste of an author. I totally fell in love with his writing style because it was deep techno thriller. I love dinosaurs, by the way, as I mentioned, by the Stoneville Gang.
Uh,
So so for me, Michael Crichton was my first author who got me hooked on reading.
oh yeah, we love Crichton on this podcast. Yeah, because of that, he's great, and he, I mean, people underestimate because he wrote in those type of genres like science fictiony kind of stuff, but like he was incredibly intelligent. This guy was writing nonfiction. This guy was testifying before Congress. This guy was medical degrees. This guy was incredibly brilliant and just happened to fall into being a good creative as well. So yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally loved his writing. And, then eventually I discovered Dan Brown and James
oh yeah,
Patterson. Um, then I read, I'm trying to think of the author who reads all these legal thrillers.
Grisham.
Yep, John Grisham. So I was reading a lot of John Grisham then going into college. I thought I was going to be an attorney. So Grisham, Patterson, Crichton were my early influential writers that I was just consuming. And then, I started to in college explore more, nonfiction and got really excited about the whole idea of a biography and memoirs. I started reading a lot of presidential biographies and American history, like memoirs and biographies and nonfiction research type books. And that for me was either connected to the curriculum I was reading anyway, or it was stuff that just really excited me because it was just I loved facts, I loved information, and the more facts I could consume and surround myself, the better. And I really got excited by some of that writing as well.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And you were a teacher for years before your political career and all of that. I was a teacher for many years there teaching college. What got you into teaching? What did you teach? And then what got you out of teaching as well?
Good question. So I was studying in my second year at Ithaca College. It was in Marty Brownstein's legislative behaviors class where it was a mock of the U.S. Senate. And we had to pick a senator, and we had to be that senator. And every class was a Senate session. So we would go in, there'd be an absence of a quorum and a roll call, and then we would have floor speeches and all that stuff. I had to pick a senator. I picked Mike DeWine of Ohio, and he was boring. He had like went out from college to law school, then became like a district attorney or an attorney general, and then straight to the U.S. Senate. And I thought, this guy has no life experience. He hasn't done anything outside of go to college and then become elected. And that was perhaps the path I was on, and felt like that would be an inauthentic path as a political leader, to be someone who never worked an hourly job before or after college, or, after college, or worked where I had to like make ends meet and would understand, go back to Clinton's roots, right? What the economic struggles of the middle class were. And I felt like, boy, I really ought to have life experience. And maybe also Ithaca was not the right place for me. It was 7 hours from home, getting homesick. So I transferred to Penn State after taking a social foundations of education class at Ithaca and discovering all these social issues that I was super excited about: socioeconomic disparity, the achievement gap. There was a lot of social policy going on in education, and that could be an exciting place to be. So I went and volunteered with the Boys and Girls Club in Ithaca and really had a great time working with young people. And even though my classmates in high school thought I would be a principal someday, I thought that would never be me. And then, 5-6 years later, here I am transferring to Penn State in order to become a teacher. And I settled on English. English for me was the right fit. Even though I loved history, I love the power of words, and I love the creativity of poetry and creative writing. So I wanted to be a high school English teacher, and I studied at Penn State, finished in 2002, and went to work right away in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, as a public school teacher. And it was phenomenal the first 2 years, but the middle of the second year, No Child Left Behind was No Child Left Behind was becoming implemented around the United States, including in our district. And by my third year of teaching, even though I'd become tenured, I was starting to see a lot of students being told they weren't going to graduate because of high stakes testing. These were 11th graders. A lot of damage had already been done, either to them or by them, to their educational pathway. And there was little I could do in 9 weeks or 18 weeks to change that. And yet they were being told, pass this high stakes test or you won't get a diploma. And they were just wrecked by it. Their parents were wrecked by it. I started to volunteer to be a remedial teacher in the mornings at 7 o'clock before school to help these students with their test prep. I stayed after school and did more test prep and remediation on reading and writing with these students. And I became outraged at what was happening to the education system and got politically involved. I had worked a little bit on the Gore campaign in 2000, but in 2004, here I am in the middle of my beginning of my teaching career, got involved working a State House campaign by this former teacher who was running for State House in Pennsylvania. And I emailed him and said, are you looking for staff? He said, yes, of course. And I wasn't paid $1 to work on that campaign, but I volunteered tons of time in helping develop what was eventually, I would come to understand, grassroots organizing, canvas operations. I was helping him figure out what doors to knock, what his message should be, how to recruit volunteers. And so then that political spark got reignited in me. And even though we lost that campaign and John Kerry lost the 2004 presidential election, I felt like I wasn't done, that I was hungry for political change, and that I wasn't seeing it being able to be accomplished from the classroom. So then my dreams of becoming elected or working in that system kind of resurfaced. And I've become very active in my teachers union and sought out an opportunity to work with unions in the United States and applied for a job and got hired. And so I left teaching in order to get involved in the AFL-CIO in a regional organizing job where I was going to be doing community and political organizing for the AFL-CIO. And it was a huge shift. It was a big change from what I was doing in the classroom, but I kind of just closed my eyes and jumped in feet first and figured I would learn as I go. I made some of my greatest friendships, learned some of my greatest lessons, met some of my favorite mentors working in the America's labor movement. And that was, 10 years of my career was working in organized labor, where I got to work with both Republicans and Democrats, where I got to work on a variety of issues, not just your typical labor issues of collective bargaining. And it was really exciting for me. But education never left me. I was always teaching. When I was in the front of a room, teaching people to go knock on a door or canvass a neighborhood, I was teaching them how to have a conversation, how to listen. So those skills that I learned at Penn State to be a teacher, to break things down into their smallest, most just digestible part, they always carried with me, and they continue with me to this day and to what I'm doing today. And I feel like I never stopped being a teacher. I feel like it's something you always are once you are a teacher, or that it's in you. You just find different ways to teach. And while I would never re-enter a 9 through 12 classroom willingly to teach kids full time as my job, I do really value education and learning. I think it's an essential part of how we kind of get out of the mess we're in today, is to do a better job of educating and cultivating minds and giving people the skills to be more careful and thoughtful when they're getting information. And I think that's what is lacking at the moment. So, but that for me teaching was such an important part of who I am. And I think it continues to teach me lessons on how to develop a book and how to sell a book, and how to pitch the next manuscript, or how to get myself in the door. It's often it goes back to those teacher skills.
Absolutely. And being somebody I taught at the college level mostly, and this is just the stuff that you would see once you're involved in it. It chews up and spits out a lot of motivated educators, like a lot of people that really want to go into a community or do higher ed and make a difference in somebody's life. Because you think, you mentioned like your 4th or 5th grade teacher's name, you still remember it, you remember these people, they do affect you in a way. And I think that there's honor in people being like, oh, I want to do that. But it is, once you get behind that curtain there, it does chew up a lot of people. I remember a guy I went to grad school with, and he was a much better teacher than I was. He had much more patience. He was just better with the students and stuff and all of that. And I social media, you can kind of keep up with people now. And I never realized that he left teaching, a few years ago. And I'm like, man, that guy left. Like, he was way better at this than I was. And like, and it's what a loss, It kind of chewed him up and spit him out as well. And then you see like you said, I mean, I guess this is the next question here where I go into like, why politics? You know, what got you into politics? You know, um, like kind of going into running campaigns and stuff like that and running for office. Was it the educational kind of jumping off point for you to kind of try and do education policy, or was it just why politics? Yeah, why leave teaching to go into politics and all of that?
Yeah, I think it was that itch that I had set aside at Ithaca, where I didn't feel like my political career was ready yet, but I still was hungry to see better policy, to see social justice, to see economic justice, the promise of those things fulfilled for communities who I've always seen being left behind because I grew up in an old shuttered steel town and tin town. So I really understood what it meant for people to feel like they're not being heard, they're not being seen. And some of it was altruism, some of it was like, oh, I'm going to go elect this person, and that win is going to be the chip that gets me on the governor's campaign that then launches my career to be this strategist people want, and then I'll be the governor someday, right? And those lines are never as clear, and there are way more hurdles than you imagine. And then I learned later in life that the good guys and good girls don't always win. You can be true to your values, but there are sinister and conniving people out there who cut deals and do things that win the day. And it's lessons that I've brought into my literature and my fiction as well, that the good people don't always win. The people with the most votes don't always win. It's unfortunate, and that's the reality. And it's hard to imagine a democracy that's true, but it is. And so we have to, I think, look back to those early experiences and say, in organized labor, I learned there was real power in organizing. There was real power in helping people to come together around common interest, and to have power through that unification. Whether that's in the workplace, whether that's by unifying a community, and getting that community to swing in a candidate's direction who's going to listen to them, prioritize them. And so a lot of times I felt like I was, early on, I was just cutting my teeth learning how these systems and these processes worked, so that when I either found the right candidate or I myself became a candidate, I would be ready and I would know how to win so that good policy would eventually be done. And, a funny thing happened on the way to the ballot box. I discovered that there are lots of great people who lose. There are lots of great people who, once they get there, can't affect change because it's a very big system that really has the inertia of the status quo behind it. And so change is very difficult to effectuate either in local, state, or federal government. So I took a step back after the Obama race. I started running myself as a kid, and I ran for borough council in my little town. I won, right? So I felt that's exciting. And I started getting involved in issues like police and parks and zoning and really unsexy things. But I was excited by it. I was excited to go to the meetings on Tuesday nights and, listen and discern and vote. And I was in a small conservative town, and they were excited to see that this guy who wasn't the same political party as them and 20 or 30 years younger than them was a good person, that someone they were like suddenly curious why it was so easy to work with me, why I would listen, and I didn't look or act like many of the other people that they may have imagined would come forward from my party. So I think it taught me lessons too about party doesn't matter. There's not a Republican way to keep the water clean in a small town. There's not a Democratic way to keep the water clean in a small town. It's just keep the water on, follow what the law says. And it used to be my mantra that the partisanship should be set aside for just doing what's right. And I think 20 years later, things have become way more polarized in the country, and it's not as easy to say that, right? Because there now is a Republican way to clean the water, and there now is a Democratic way to clean the water, and it's super partisan, even at these local levels. So, I'm excited by policy for sure. And I had illusions of grandeur that someday I would be governor or a senator. But those things don't matter to me now anymore. Or I'm a father and a husband, and I really value my time. And I personally have sacrificed a lot of time in the name of other candidates, helping them win. I've watched other candidates sacrifice their lives, their marriages, their happiness to win offices. And I don't know, maybe in the last 5, 6 years, I've discovered that life is short and you don't have to be chasing that thing to achieve happiness. And maybe the happiness is achieved in other ways. And for me, writing has suddenly brought me a lot more happiness and a lot more excitement than any campaign I ever worked. So that for me has been a light bulb moment of I am doing good and I'm maybe affecting change. I'm entertaining more than I'm affecting change with my writing, but that's okay. It's okay to be entertaining too. And people need laughter as much as they need good tax policy. Maybe in fact more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, it's people like to think of politicians, especially now in the social media age, they like to think of them as these little characters or something that they can that they're not real people that are sacrificing things to do this. And I mean, just putting yourself out there in that way to run for office, I think people really underestimate what that, or maybe they don't because not a lot of people do it, right? But yeah, and you worked as a strategist for years, and for me, and I think a lot of other people, I always think of, like the James Carvilles of the world, that kind of the hard hitting, no nonsense types that are kind of known for being a little bit ruthless, right, and getting the stuff done, getting the the famous Clinton campaign and all that. It's really his claim to fame,
right.
What is it like behind the scenes on a political campaign like that, especially as a strategist, somebody who's running the show for these, even at the local or like you said, you've done presidential stuff too. What's that like?
I would say that it is a lot less sexy than everyone thinks, or the way it's portrayed in movies. A lot of it's just really hard work, very stressful work. Most of the people who are working these campaigns are working 100 hours a week. These days are glued to computers or their device every waking moment. And it's often about just fighting fire. Because on a campaign, you are just trying to stop the current fire from turning into a blaze that consumes and destroys and ends your candidate's ambitions. So you're just constantly trying to stop fires from burning. And the fires could be a donor who's not going to write the check, or an organization that's going to endorse your opponent, or some piece of lurid history that's going to come out about your candidate, or a story that's being written that about something that's innocent, but with all the intonation and claiming that there could be something else there, and trying to turn good people into nefarious characters in the press that could sink your chances. They're long hours, and there is many times on the parts of the people at the very top of those campaigns, including the candidates, a lot of self-doubt and a lot of worry, a lot of hand-wringing, and a lot of they put on the face the minute they walk out on that stage and act like they know they're going to win and they're the right person. And the minute they walk back off, they spend the next hour worrying that they said the wrong things, that no one really likes them. Everyone around them is going to just jam a knife in their back when they have the first chance. And so that's the type of stuff I try to reveal in some of my writing too, is that it is not a space that does make political campaigns are not a space where people are made to be built up and feel good about themselves. Usually they're deconstructed every hour, and they get more and more hangups and more crises thrown at them. And by the end, they just can't wait for election day because they want it to end. They want that finality of either go on with their life and do something else, or then win and wonder what the hell they're going to do with it next.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess people always think of that documentary, right, with the Clinton campaign, with Carville just kind of shouting at people in a room in that Southern Louisiana accent, and everyone's like, "Oh, this guy's just taking charge." It's like the amount of stress that was probably
and people swear a lot more than you think, and they smoked a lot more back in the day than you thought, and people often choose abusing anything they can to stay awake. I use a lot of caffeine, to, and now I don't drink any caffeine. I'm off of it. I drank enough to kill a small team of elephants. So,
why did you stop caffeine?
Oh, it affected my heart. I
Really?
was drinking so much caffeine, it was screwing up my heart rhythms, and I had to have a heart ablation, and just realized that, hey, caffeine is not worth it. I will
Yeah.
just, and I don't also don't feel like I'm running on electricity anymore because I was drinking. This is no joke. 10 to 14 cups of coffee a day,
Whew.
3 to 4 sodas. So like 1,000 milligrams of caffeine a day is what I was intaking for years. So yeah, that's enough to kill elephants, and it'll kill you too. So moderation is good for me. I'm better without it.
Yeah, yeah.
Root beer and decaf. That's what I drink now.
Yeah, and going off of that too, power. You know, it's a theme in your books, and clearly, you know, in a lot of political careers and just politics in general. You know, what got you interested in power, and kind of, and I mean that as, you know, as broadly as possible. You know, power in terms of literally being in charge of something, like in political office, and just kind of power is just a means in itself. You know, all of that. What, and I mean that in terms of your writing, and in terms of kind of a broader sense too. Yeah.
So I got exposed to power dynamics, I think, early in my career. The power dynamic between the board, the school board, and the teachers union, and that power dynamic of like who held the power and what could they do with it. And then I was working on political campaigns, and I saw incumbents with lots of power abusing that power. Um, and that no one was outraged by that abuse. And what do I mean by that? So they could use their office to help reelect themselves by sending lots of newsletters in election years to their voters when you would otherwise not hear a word from them.
Right.
Or they would, you know, suddenly be at every ribbon cutting. And anytime there was a microphone, those incumbents would be out there insisting that they give 30 seconds of remarks. And it got them in the news, it got them headlines. But the very first time I got to sit in a room with an actual governor, that was also the exposure to real power. Here's a person who had authority to do things, to veto legislation, to give a speech to the General Assembly that could change policy. And this particular governor knew it. He actually loved power. He loved being in power. And so that for me became exciting. It became, it would be great to be close to people in power, to see the right people do good things with it. But I also witnessed over time how power changes people. And that is definitely a theme, two themes: the pursuit of power itself and how that changes people. And once they have power, how does that change them? I think there are very few that aren't changed by holding a position of authority. It doesn't have to be elected.
Right.
You could be the boss of the company. And a lot of times people say that's not who they were before they became the boss, and now they're the boss. And I think it does change people. I think that there are very few people who are able to remain who they were. And I'd say I'm guilty of it too. Once I became a leader in politics and got elected to certain positions, I lost sight of why I was doing it and who had helped me get there. And it didn't have to be about the next office or the next leapfrog or the next move up the ladder. And I think that obsession with power can consume you, and you totally lose sight of what's really important. And, I can, for me, recognize, like, I lost sight of my kids. I lost sight of my wife. I lost sight of that time in our family because I'm out knocking doors, talking to strangers instead of being at home or being at the baseball game. And they remember that, right? And so that's where I felt like, these are lessons you need to learn, that, power is important, but so are the people around you. And so in the books that I'm writing, it's, if you want to be in power and you want to affect lives, how can you do that, but not at the cost of your personal life in the process? Or if it does do that damage to your personal life, like, what do you do to try to mend those fences and bring people along? And I think, there's, a really exciting story. Many stories are about power. A lot of political thrillers. You watch West Wing, The Diplomat,
Right.
A lot of pop culture stuff. There's some really cool things about power, how absolute power corrupts absolutely, or how, some people, I'm the altruism, like, I'm the good person, I'm the good guy, and when I have the power, I won't hurt people.
Right.
But then they do.
Exactly.
Or they realize that it's not a zero-sum game. Yes, they'll help many, but hurt others in the process. And so I think it's a really an interesting theme to explore in thriller, but also with the lens I'm bringing to it, which is not just your typical which terrorism thriller, which has become very popular. And,
Right.
there's some really great writers like Brad Thor and others who are doing really cool things with political thriller today. But I'm echoing back to an older age of thriller, like the All the King's Men, Advise and Consent, where it was more procedural political thriller, looking at the machinations of government and the principal office holders as the main characters and their power dynamics and who has more power than the other and how does that affect relationship. And those who are power um, negative and those who are power positive, what's that dynamic like? And how can they actually, affect one another? There's really some cool dynamics how people who are seemingly powerless actually have lots of influence and lots of power in some of the stories I've written.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that too, because there's this fantasy I think a lot of people have where they said, oh, like I would never do that. Like if I got into that position of power or something, it's like, well, it's easy to say when you've never gotten that, magic wand, so to speak, that you can exercise if you wanted to. And then, there's history's littered with stories of people, abusing that and all of that. But I mean, it's just something that I think nobody is honest about in terms of there's a fantasy. It's just a fantasy. Yeah. That, oh, I would never do it. It's like, yeah. Okay. Well, once you get into that seat, you'll see like.
Exactly. And then I gave this line to Sylvester Billings, who's the Speaker of the House in The World I've Built in Tree of Liberty. And someone's talking about, well, what if we win? Does it really matter if we don't win? And he says, history and the rules are all written by winners.
Yeah.
And that's a reminder that it's not just the rules and the laws that get written by people who win. It's the history books too.
Exactly.
It's the narrative about how that went down. They largely are the people who get to say how the long-term context. And that was like, that's the essence of power. To not win has more consequences than just the election itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And going off that a little bit too, and this is not a podcast where we want like definitive answers on anything, just your thoughts. What is it that attracts people to power? Do you think what is it that makes people even want to seek an office like this? You have to go through so much to even get into political office. It's like the micro. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right. Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. Scope, as they call it, putting everything that you've ever done, said, published, any action you've taken ever, every car you've bought, how many houses you own, that's all put under a microscope. What is it that people, or just your thoughts on it? Yeah. What attracts people to it?
I love the Enneagram. And if you're not familiar with it, Google it. It's a personality test. It's a personality framework. And it basically says there are 8 basic personality types, or 9. I can't remember at the moment. But anyway, there's spectrum, there's nine personality types that go around this ring. And I think for each personality type, the pursuit of power has different meaning. For example, there's the reformer. And so for them, power is about bringing back justice and balance. When they pursue power, they're about trying to restore an imbalance and to make things fair. Then there are the achievers. The pursuit of power and winning is for them, the fact that they won, whether or not they use the power is besides the point. It's the fact that they won and someone else lost. For the achiever, it's the victory of the power. It's the achievement thereafter. It's the pelt on the wall. Then you've got challengers who may use power in order to as revenge,
right.
or to enact some power against others who have wronged them in the past, or to create an imbalance in the opposite of the reformer mindset. So I think for everyone who might come to the pursuit of power comes at it with a different reason and a different agenda, but they're never as plain about it, right? Everyone will get up on the stage and microphone and say, I'm in this race for the people who are overlooked.
Yeah.
and I'm gonna bring about the respect for blah blah blah. But then there are people who get into office and they think that power should not be used. So they're in a position of, I want to keep things as they are. Their power is through not acting on anything. It's to keep things neutral or to keep the status quo. I also think that there are some people who, and I've seen these people, they don't ever want to hold the power, but
Right.
they're addicted to the people who do. And so they like to be the lieutenants of the people who are in power. They like to be the confidants. There are some people who are sexually very addicted to people in power.
Right.
It's an aphrodisiac for them, and it's something that really turns them on. They want to be around powerful people. And then there are people who I think pursue power. There are people who are doing it for the right reason, right? They're actually trying to do it to affect some positive force for the world. And I felt like that's where I was trying to operate. I'm an achiever, so I'm someone who is trying to win because I like to win and I like to achieve. But I had, an agenda in my mind of I was going to change things for the better. I learned in life that my view of better is not another person's view of better.
Right.
And there are two ways to slice that, or maybe more. And so some people are pursuing power for an agenda and for, I think, a sense of helping other people, lifting people up. But I think we all learned the lessons that power does change people. And so along the way, you, I think, can lose sight very quickly of why it is you tried to get it in the first place. And also maybe that it's like sand, that if you don't act quickly enough, the power that you think you have can move through your fingers in an instant. There are very few offices in this country where you alone can do anything.
Right.
You typically have to do it in combination or consult with other people. And so if you squeeze too hard, that sand's going to just evaporate. If you don't have the right mix in that sand, it's not going to stay strong. So I think that's the lesson too, is that power is very fleeting and it can come and go very quickly on a whim.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what makes it a good kind of tool for fiction too, right? Like because it is all those different aspects of it, all these different ways, and then it allows you to create kind of dynamics where people are lying or even telling half truths or things like that, and really creates great stuff for fiction when people are trying to pursue. So and you mentioned the kind of fantasy epics, right? Like the most recent one that everybody knows, Game of Thrones, right? These kind of epics about who's going to get this power to do this stuff, and then the soft power. Big proponent of soft power myself in terms of how it's so underestimated. People are, well, you have to wave this magic wand and you sign the bill and you have the power. So sometimes the influence is more powerful than any actual signature. Yeah,
totally right. Totally right.
And again, it's going into politics here. When you ran for office, obviously that comes with a lot of pressure, a lot of hit pieces, even for local offices. And I saw even in 2011, when you ran for commissioner, you were smeared publicly by former colleagues and things like that.
Yep.
What was that like to have your entire life on trial as you run for office? And then, getting smeared by people that you would call friends or even, acquaintances. Yeah.
Yeah, hellish. And I think that that's the piece of this that I underestimated going into it, was that I got a phone call from someone who said, this story is going to publish, and I don't stab people in the back. I stab them right in the belly. So I'm calling to let you know this is coming.
Right. Yeah.
And it was like, it was crushing. And I think that, you fast forward in your life 20 years and none of that matters anymore. Right. And you've matured and you've grown up and you say, I don't need that anymore. But that's the thing about politics. It is brass knuckled even at the local level. In fact, maybe more so at times, right, because the stakes for some people are so high. Their whole status in the community is based on the fact that they're on the school board or that they're the chair of the water authority. And so anyone to come in and challenge that threatens their world. And, I think I was a little Pollyannish about going in, and that, based on the fact of the merits of what I was arguing, I would win. And when I ran for commissioner again in 2019, um, everyone thought I was going to win, including myself. And I came up 200 votes short out of 50,000 cast. And I ran that race on issues, on big issues. And I could sit at a debate with my fellow opponents in that race, and I could speak from my heart about what I would do. And they all sat there with scripts, talking points, notes. And that's the moment where I felt like it didn't matter to me if I won or lost, because I knew who I was, what I would do, and I wasn't going to be defined by this alone. But that's also the reason that after that race, I felt like I needed to end my time in politics, because even at the local level, the horse trading and the bitterness and the conniving deal cutting was just so disgusting. And my wife had gone through a health crisis in 2017, and I realized, like, tomorrow is promised to no one.
Right.
So why should I spend time away from my family at rubber chicken dinners and canvases on a Saturday, unless I really felt like my time was necessary and needed to be there. I really re-examined my priorities and felt like, nope, this is not where I want to be, and I'm not going to keep living my life pursuing the next election. That there's better ways to live my life, and there was good closure in that moment. And it has changed so dramatically from my first campaign in 1992 with Bill Clinton and 2000 with Al Gore. It is a much, much harsher climate. And that's what I try to describe in Bull Moose, is that this is the path we're on. If things have become this more harsh in 20 years, then 20 more years from now, could we see just outright violence against candidates themselves? And how would they react to that? And then how does that have a way of making us worse off as a nation if the threat of violence actually pushes people from participating in the system?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's compared to writing some too. I think people underestimate how cutthroat kind of literary world is for that as well. I mean, it's not quite as bad probably as the political world, but there's still the kind of, you think somebody's your friend, but then if you get some type of award or some type of clout, or socially or monetarily, you're in this crosshairs. Like you win a nice award, you're like, oh, I got a nice award. It's like, oh, all of a sudden you're now in the world of politics, and this way you're going to fall in and out of favor. People are going to be looking for a reason to write a hit piece or smear you or something publicly. That's one thing I've noticed with journalism too, where I feel like the people have gotten much too comfortable just publicly smearing people. Like it kind of get away with it too. It's treated as if it's real credible work, and I'm just like, this person's actually a liar, like an unhinged liar, and then we're publishing them in the New York Times. Like, right. you need to stop propping this person up because they're going to yell at you or whatever if you call them a liar. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, we haven't gotten there yet. Clearly, clearly it's getting worse. I mean,
there's a book I had to read in college called The Masters by C.P. Snow, and I'm not even sure if it's still in print. You might have to get it like on eBay or something. But it's a wonderful story about power. And it is not about a presidential election. It's about a departmental election at a college, and how the headmaster dies at this college, and who will be the next president, and who among the faculty are going to jockey for position. And people who used to be friends with one another will stab each other in the back. And that was the first, like, here's a book, a fiction work about power. And those lessons definitely there's genes from that story in What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, because now you see in that story, people who used to be friends, who used to laugh together, are now on opposite sides of the political fight. And no one's pulling punches. And just what you think, and this is, I think, what people misunderstand about these relationships, just because people have a history doesn't mean they're going to swing as hard as they can at one another. Right. And often they do. And sometimes take like really horrific actions to beat somebody else. And there's a lot in that in politics. People who work on campaigns they'll be working with one another on one campaign, and the next cycle they'll be opponents because of the primary. And it doesn't mean anyone's going to pull a punch and anyone's going to be nice. They will be horrifically mean. And I think that's where, if you don't have the skin for it, politics can really wear you down. And I think it's getting far worse.
Yeah, I would say writing too. Yeah, people are not as bad, but people are gonna come after you. Yeah.
Yeah, my good. I hope I stay out of those crowds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's. I've had things like that. Even with this podcast, I've had things where there's people that, they want to disassociate with me for something I said or whatever, or they want to now that I have a little bit more clout in the media landscape of publishing and stuff like that. Now they want to come back and they want to be friendly. It's like, I'm not forgetting what happened there. This is the last question about politics here, and maybe the most controversial here. Michael,
here we go.
Promise.
Good.
Yeah.
All right.
And it's about the 2024 election. There's been so many articles about the campaigns, what made the difference, all of that kind of stuff. Like, what do you see as the big difference maker in the kind of the 2024, the cycle that we just lived through from the previous election cycles of the last decade or so, from your political strategist perspective or personally, or just the kind of the guy that was in and follows politics, what do you see as that? There's so much noise. I just was curious when I got you on here for your thoughts on that.
I go back to a friend of mine named Nick Unger. He is 30 years my senior in politics. But he used to say, and I think it is absolutely true, the person who defines the conversation wins the day. And Donald Trump defined the conversation about the border, about the economy, about inflation. And that had to make Kamala Harris respond and apologize or explain. So Donald Trump defined the conversation.
Right.
He made it about those things and won because of it. I also think that, zooming out, United States of America is now just one more nation where incumbents have been thrown out because the population is disgusted with not 1 year or 2 year, but 10 years of feeling like things are not getting any better. This has happened in Great Britain. It has swung twice. It swung right with the Brexit vote and has swung left again, but it could just as easily swing right again. Italy, France was on the cusp of swinging, right and throwing Macron out of office. So these are all examples of Western democracies that would typically be small d, democratic, and focused on democratic norms. The U.S. is now the next nation that is falling in line of this swing of the incumbents being thrown out. And I don't think it's because the nation is swinging right or swinging conservative. I think that they are frustrated and mad that things aren't better and getting better. I think there's been a lot of promises, but not a lot of delivery in the past 10 years. I think go back to Obamacare and say, we were told that healthcare was going to be cheaper.
Right.
Well, we all just experienced between 10 and 25% premium raises again if you have healthcare. So it's not any cheaper. And so I think you go back to 2010 and you say, okay, 14 years now, people have been asking where's the good coming? And it just has never arrived. So I think that if Donald Trump and the Republicans in control of Congress don't use the next 12 to 18 months to affect policy that makes people feel like things are going to get back on a track that they agree with, then the country will swing again in the other direction. I think it's just in this dramatic swinging phase, because my theory is that I think the politics of the Democratic and Republican parties is kind of been outmoded by the actual larger social circumstance. And so these two parties have not figured out how to respond to and act within this current 21st century environment. And the theory of the book, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, is it might take multi-dimensional party thinking to move beyond left and right, to move into a more of spherical dimension of politics, to think about reform versus status quo as a real definition of where people want to move. And we might need to take very dramatic steps in terms of empowering people so that things that they want to see done can actually happen. and not be stopped by things like, the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court that said, well, basically, money and speech have a direct relationship, and the more money you have, the more speech you have. And corporations are entitled to rights that citizens are. I don't remember that being in the Declaration of Independence, but that is now a theory that is being forwarded in social policy. So that's where I think the politics of the moment of the 2024 election landed. And I think that it could swing very dramatically again unless the U.S. population feels like something they were promised, these pains that they're feeling are going to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what the reason I asked is because I was curious. I follow probably more than the average person. I mean, I'm not somebody like in your position where I'm following it or used to, not so much anymore, I guess. But I was hearing the term working class as just being thrown around like something, and I'm just like, this is such a meaningless term. Like, what are you talking about? What does this mean? They're like, oh, this is populism is being thrown around, like these terms. I'm just like, I don't even know what they're talking about anymore. And people are like, oh, they didn't do this or somebody, or they did do this, or I'm like, what is this even referring to? The working class. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I was curious on your thoughts for that. Yeah.
Well, I think you can go back 50 years because I used to travel the country talking about an economy that works for all as part of the AFL-CIO, and they gave us a lot of economic research. One of the things that we used to talk about, if you look at the economic makeup of the U.S. as economic quintiles, meaning everyone is in a category based on shared wealth and income. You see that since about 1972, the quintiles from the least poor to the fourth quintile have basically been stagnant and flat, even in the current period that we've been in of strong economic growth. But most of the economic achievement has been owned by the top quintile, and almost all of that in the top 5 or 1% of earners. And it's the desire and hope that most people believe that they could eventually land in that fifth quintile or in that top 5% that they're willing to go on these economic chases and policy agendas that really benefit people who are making their money off of stocks and hedge funds and default swaps and all those things. Right. People who are making an hourly wage at their grocery store are never, ever going to see the economic benefits of those policies. But that's the unrest. That's where the social contract between economic productivity and average wages, they grew together for years since World War II. They stopped growing together after Watergate around that time period. We're talking about the oil crisis in the mid 70s, and you stop seeing productivity grow with wages. And a lot of things like inflation and others have had a factor in that. But that's what's really at heart of this. And you hear this. People are working harder than ever and feel like they're not getting ahead. And everything costs more than it ever did. And they want to know why that is. And no one's willing to look them in the eye and say it's because a lot of people are making money and you're not. And we're not making things that will, pass those wages on to you, right? So, and a lot of it's created by the Democratic Party on free trade. And that's why Trump, tariffs dominated presidential politics for like 100 years.
Right.
In the 19th and early 20th century, tariffs and gold standard was like the driving story of politics. So should not be surprising that we're back to that story again of trade and tariffs, because if the essence of that is how much does it cost to buy things and what are you making and is it made here? And if you're not being employed by making it here, then people like the town I grew up in are going to continue to be empty. And people are going to be wondering, where are the jobs?
And like you said, if you're explaining in politics, you're losing, right? Like, technically, like there's that kind of, Whereas so much of it is that gut feeling, and then people rationalize backwards from there, where you're walking through the store or something, and that's your gut feeling. And that's incredible. But and then we'll get to writing now. We get to writing now, Michael. Yeah, but
Awesome.
What got you into writing novels? You know, after a successful career in politics as a strategist, holding office, why write novels? You know, why not write nonfiction? You know, that's like the big thing that the market, you know, air quotes listeners want, right? Like, why write novels right now? What drew you into novels?
Yeah, I really love being creative, and I felt like there was going to be so much more fun in writing fiction and writing a novel than writing biography or research nonfiction. Now, that doesn't mean I would never.
So the
It
book
means
deals
I,
are better if you were doing it. You get the better book deals with the
yes,
biography and
uh,
politics. Yeah.
for sure, right? But I feel like for me, it was much more exciting to write creatively, and I love teaching fiction to my students and the power of a powerful story, the way that a really meaningful story can impact people and touch people. I felt like that for me is why I wanted to write fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true. You know, like I mean, I worked in marketing for many years and it was always about the stories. And I've had a former marketing executive on the podcast where he was talking about, he says he sees that a lot in marketing now. He's retired, you know, but he was just saying, he's like, I see a lot of ads where I'm like, where's the story? You know, what are you trying to sell people something? You got to sell them a story. It really does make a difference. Like if you tell a story, I think even the story we tell ourselves, right? Like the story we tell ourselves about our history, about our, you know, the kind of mythical figures, or even, you know, the great presidents that are on the monuments and stuff. I think that stuff like that matters more than any of the actual, you know, factual, again, air quotes,
Yeah.
thing of it. The story matters more because that gives us that feeling, or that connects with us more, maybe is the way it goes. Yeah. So I was just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've never read a work of nonfiction that made me cry.
Right.
Right. I always thought, well, wow, right? And I've
Yeah.
I've read some really great nonfiction in that regard, but it's been the fiction stories that have, for me, taken my breath away, made me laugh, made me cry, and I'm like, that's where my writing, I feel like, can be powerful because I feel like I'm a strong writer in that regard in writing fiction. But I also feel like that's where I want to be for people. I want to be an author who hits that chord, makes them laugh, maybe makes them cry when they least expect it, and touches them with a story. And again, I've done such heavy stuff for most of my life. It's been good just to feel like the pressure's off. I'm not trying to enact policy here. I'm just trying to entertain. And, there's pressure to write and to sell, but it's different kind of pressure. And for
Right.
me, that's been healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask real quickly, with the bull moose, that's a political reference, right? Are you referencing the Roosevelt,
Yeah.
bull moose?
Yeah. So the essence of the story is this: it's 20 years from now. There's a U.S. senator who lost election. You get told that at the beginning of the book. He was a first-term senator, and his party turned on him. And so he left the party. He hit reset on his life. He moved his wife and kids off to another state, and he thought, I'll just disappear and be out of politics because of how dangerous, disgusting, horrific it had become. And he had felt betrayed. And a couple colleagues from his Senate days come to him and say, Jackson Piper, we need you to run for president because the sitting president's trying to rig his election. And Jackson, who 20 years from now discovers that quality information is so hard to come by, reads a lot of underground newspaper, underground reporting, and knows that this probably is true. So it doesn't take much convincing. In fact, he had presidential ambitions when he was a senator, but having lost that, he figures he's done. You don't really get two bites of the apple. And so he is convinced after several conversations to run for president to try to stop a rigged presidential election. And so to do that, he runs for both party nominations. They're called the old party and the other party in the book, so that the reader has to guess which is which. And the parties are so outraged that Jackson's doing this that they convene special meetings after the New Hampshire primary, which he does very well in. And they basically say, well, if you're not a member of our party prior to the day before the New Hampshire primary, we will not nominate you to be our nominee at our summer convention, basically denying him any chance forward. And so Jackson and his allies realize the only way to continue this race is to resurrect the Bull Moose Party of 1912 which was a reform party. It had a reform agenda. This Teddy Roosevelt's party, essentially, he was the bull
Right.
moose in it. And it was, they could have picked many parties, but for me, there's been something really fascinating about the bull moose party and its little blip in politics. It achieved things that other third parties in the 20th century and since have not achieved. And so for me, that was the interesting hook, is to go talk about Teddy Roosevelt, who is the first popular American president, like making the presidency a celebrity. Teddy
Right.
Roosevelt did that. And the Bull Moose Party was hugely exciting for like all of 2 years. And then everybody went back to being their other old parties before. So yeah, that was the exciting thing. And so that's the essence of the story, is can this third party break through and finally stop these two parties from being corrupt and useless? And at what cost? Because what will these two parties do to stop him? And what will the president and his allies do to stop the bull moose, which, from gaining any momentum and disrupting the status quo?
Yeah, fantastic.
And the cover for this book is a red, white, and blue moose on a black background with a burned presidential seal. And people see that cover and they're like, I just love that cover. And
Right.
many know about the Bull Moose Party. So they're like, this must be a book about Teddy Roosevelt. And I say, oh, maybe if Teddy Roosevelt is reincarnated in Jackson Piper, because it takes place in 2044, and then they're interested. So that's
Right.
like, okay, if they love science fiction or speculative fiction, they can get excited about a bull moose party in the 21st century.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you about publishing, and particularly kind of like self-publishing and stuff like that. And kind of the press, Epoch Edge Press. Is that your press?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. What made you want to go that route? How did that go through that? Is, again, this type of podcast where listeners are very curious about this, especially the way the industry is right now and kind of crumbling. What made you go that direction in terms of like this publishing yourself and starting your own press and all of that?
So nothing against the five major publishers, but I felt like for me, the timeline would be more my timeline and the writing would be more writing that I could control if I went the indie publishing route. And I could do it in a way that still had all the professionalism of edited work with well-designed cover, a strong story, strongly vetted by people who have worked or do work in the industry. What I would miss out on was distribution,
Right.
and what I would miss out would be on advance checks.
Right.
And I was willing to bet that my advance checks would not be large.
Yeah.
And let's be real, the five major publishing houses, they can overpromise in marketing and
Right. Yeah.
and not deliver. And so the more I researched this, the more I discovered there were lots of really successful indie publishers doing direct sales. That it takes time, so you have to be patient in that regard. But that if you put the time and effort into writing 4, 5, 10 books as an indie, you can really find success in being indie published and have direct sales or being widely distributed, which I am. So I'm on Amazon and selling direct and selling other places. That doesn't mean I wouldn't consider going hybrid in the future, but
Right.
I would think that the bar for me is high because at the end of the day, I want control over my universe and I want control over my characters. And I know my personality would bristle at a developmental editor coming to me and saying, we hate this character, cut them, or this ending, we don't like it. We don't think it'll sell. You need to change the ending to this.
Right.
And I think that's not an environment where I would flourish. So I create Epic Edge for liability protection purposes, and also because I'm really excited about the indie route. I think it has a lot more potential and growth in the next 20 years than the five necessarily have in terms of market share, unless they discover something innovative. So
Right.
that's why I'm excited to be part of this indie world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always, my big thing with that too is that they're like, oh, it's not going to sell. We know what's going to sell. It's like, really? You know what's going to sell? Because the sales are going down. Like, do you really know
Yeah.
what's going to sell?
Right. And then you look at E.L. James and Hugh Howie
Yeah.
and
Sanderson and
Colleen Hoover and Sanderson. And so these
Yeah.
are all indies who these publishing houses would have turned away or did. Right. So
and
yeah,
then,
don't
and then
tell
they
us
come
what
crawling back, with large checks,
large checks. Yeah.
This is another question we ask all writers. What is your routine like? What is your writing routine like? How do you like to approach it?
I write best in the morning. And I think that if I can devote 2 hours to my day to writing, I can make solid progress towards writing a book a year. I've been in a rapid release phase because Bull Moose was originally intended to be one story. And when I finished it at 160,000 words, I was like, this is not an epic fantasy. I'll never be able to make any money off this, let alone find a reader who will invest in book one at, 700 pages. So
Yeah.
And then I discovered how important it is to have a series. So I broke it up. And so for me, I'm a pantser. So I'm writing by the seat of my pants, and a blank page in front of me.
Right.
I'm just kind of riffing to see like where does the story go, and I like to just keep moving forward. I was told, or I heard it said, that the first draft is the author telling the story to themselves,
Right.
and it's
Yeah.
the second draft where they're telling the story to the reader. I really like to invest the time in just telling myself the story, and then when in the second draft I work out all the pieces that don't work or the inconsistencies, or oh, this is a crappy character, or the dialogue here doesn't work. I like to work that out later. I like to just do a good day is 4,000 words for me. I feel like that's a solid rhythm that I want to have. Many days it's 1,000 over those
Right.
2 hours. And then there's days where I might really suddenly find the story and put a 10,000 word day together. But that's
Right.
like writing all day and totally mentally exhausted by the end. But it's morning routine. It's alone in a space, coffee in hand, the blank screen, and just kind of plowing forward to see where I go.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I like how simple it is, and also I know Stephen King always says he's like it's about what happens next. That's the driving force. Is like kind of, how do you get into the next thing, and that's what kind of gets you to pick up in the morning and start doing more. But yeah, that's great. Another question we like to ask writers, we don't have to get into any numbers and anything like that, but how do you make a living? Do you make any money off the literature? Do you have a day job?
I have a day job. I'm still consulting and doing strategic planning. And for me, the writing I think will take time. I think being realistic about 5 to 10 years to
Right.
see substantial income where it supplements to a point where I even consider doing it completely full time.
Right.
But that's okay. I think I'm aware of that arc, and it takes that time. But it is self-sustaining now, so that if I'm investing in a book, Bull Moose has made what I've invested into it back, so that's good.
Right.
And Tree of Liberty's only been out for a couple weeks, but I'm excited to see those sales picking up. I'm really excited by a lot of podcasts and other indie authors who are out there these days talking about working their own marketing and working their own offers and working their own direct sales, so they can run ads. And that's where I'm starting to explore. I'm trying to figure out what's the right balance of my own investment in this and how far do I want to go.
Right.
Because you can go down the path of Facebook and BookBub ads and blow $1,000 a day and see no return.
Right. Yeah.
And so I've been very focused as an indie on trying to work on my self-liquidating offers. And until I can have maybe a third or fourth book that's out there and solid, it might take that time. So for now, I'm just being excited, a book at a time. I'm really just trying to find my readership.
Right.
And so then I'm being very methodical and deliberate about introducing my political thriller science fiction genre, finding readers who are excited by it, making sure they have plenty to read, and just keeping them happy. And we'll worry about fantastical book sale numbers
Right.
per month, maybe by 2030.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I like that answer. Yeah, absolutely. And this is another one we like to ask writers. What advice would you give to writers out there who are just starting out, maybe trying to build something like that on their own, doing the indie route or traditional?
I think it's really important to find the community out there. There's such a really welcoming community of indie writers out there, some great online groups to join. And I think the more you can find those folks, they'll help you get through this, because you're going to go through so much doubt and fear and frustration and make so many mistakes that if you're working with other people in the process, they'll tell you, yes, get your KDP account set up and then don't break certain rules there. Like, don't miss your deadlines. and other folks who are going to say, well, don't spend 10,000 on editing, right? Or don't bully these firms who are you going to, give them lots and lots of money and they're going to market your book, because it may not come to fruition in terms of sales. So finding a community of writers, and I think also read as much as you can in the genre that you're going to write in, as well as books on craft. Right. There's a lot of great resources about Snowflake method and about the first 5 pages and about plot and structure. Like, read those books, learn about dialogue, learn about what an editor is thinking about, so that you can I think learn as much about the craft as well as what the genre expects in terms of arc and characters and descriptions and pace. You need to know that. And even though, like with me, I'm trying to reinvigorate a genre that's not as common, I'm still reading a lot of thriller. Political thrillers that I read don't necessarily have as much DNA shared with what like Dan Brown or Daniel Silva are writing with what I'm writing, because I have, it's a political setting, but it isn't just a straight up terrorism story about the world is ending unless we kill the terrorists. I think that for me, it's about, you got to live in those two worlds, and this can be a very lonesome profession. So it's really important to not isolate yourself too much, because your own thoughts will eat you alive, and you'll never finish anything. You'll never finish a draft. You'll never finish a page. You've got to have people who encourage you to keep going.
That's fantastic. And then the final question here is, what are you working on now? What's taking up your time? If you feel free to share it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm really trying to build excitement for the Bull Moose series. So I just released Tree of Liberty, and so I'm working on the launch of that. We're 2 weeks in of a 60-day launch plan. So doing more interviews, doing more distribution, getting some more reviews in on that book. And I've got the first draft started of 2 books. One I'm calling the Franklin Doctrine at the moment, and another one's untitled because the way that book 2 ends, something is a cliffhanger there, and I'm discovering whether or not my readers want to know what happens in that moment at the end of the book. So book 3 is going to go in one of 2 directions, and I haven't decided which direction yet. So I'm working on both drafts, and we'll see which one excites me more. And I'm also going to give myself the grace of trying to get the next book out in September, not January.
Right, yeah.
Because I think a longer release schedule, 1 book a year, is probably a healthier way to write this. So if I've got 4 books on the market by 2025, the 3 you mentioned plus 1 more, I think I'm going to be on path for my 5-year plan in this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you normally write like a couple drafts at a time, couple different projects at a time? Or?
Yeah, because I'm a man of I read multiple books at the same time.
Right,
I read a audio book when I'm driving places. I read a book at night before I go to sleep, a different book in the mornings. So I'm reading multiple things and I'm writing multiple things. So I've got different folders set up with different drafts. And whatever catches my fancy. In fact, Tree of Liberty begins with the first chapter of Tree of Liberty is actually the original first chapter of What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, but I just discovered it didn't work.
Right.
So I pulled it out and moved it to the next book, and now it makes a lot more sense where it is. So I think that's where I feel like if I'm working on multiple things, eventually I'll find the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We definitely support that here. Michael, this has been fantastic. Where can people find your stuff? Give your handles, your website, all of that.
Yeah, I think the best place to find me and my writing is at michaelfedorbooks.com. That's my website. It's like the hat without the A, Fedor. And there you can find each of my books. I have a free book that you can download from my site, my novella, The Senate Deception. It's free. So you get a taste for my writing, and it includes the first 2 chapters of What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose. So if you really love it, you can also preview my novel. And you can follow me at Michael Fedor Books on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm also on BookBub, and I'm on Goodreads. And so wherever you can find Michael Fedor and Bull Moose, Google that, and you'll find my writing. My books are out in ebook, print, and audiobook. And so regardless of how you like to read, I think you'll be able to find my work and hopefully give it a try if you're interested in thriller with a political setting and a futuristic edge.
That's fantastic. You heard it there, listeners. Again, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. Please come back when that next book is hitting the shelves.
Andrew, I've loved our chat, so please, I can't wait to come back again to have you board.
Fantastic.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.